American Public Media.
Business Results LLC, dedicated to helping companies improve productivity, increase sales, and reduce turnover. We provide training and coaching for managers and leaders to enhance their effectiveness in achieving business goals. For more information, visit businessresultsllc.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Dennis and Ives, a mixed-use development situated in the heart of Jacksonville's Rail Yard District, offering private executive suites for lease. More information, 904-370-3710, dennisandives.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, they're stubborn, thick-skinned, and also some of the most prolific and dedicated artists in their field. Today, we talk to current and self-published authors about writing after literary rejection. Then, it's the 75th opening night for the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra. We ask Director Courtney Lewis why he chose Mahler's Resurrection for the season's new start. And if you've been stuck in traffic recently, we'll tell you how to make your voice heard in a new regional transportation survey. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also tag
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. There appears to be a respite in the intense fighting across the Lebanon-Israel border this morning. This after Israel and the militant group Hezbollah launched their biggest cross-border attacks in months over the weekend. The region had been on edge for weeks, worried that a broader confrontation would erupt since Israel killed a Hezbollah commander in Beirut. NPR's Jana Roth has more.
We have to remember that fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border parallels the war in Gaza. Hezbollah entered the conflict to support the Palestinian militant group Hamas. And Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has made clear that until Hamas and Israel reach a ceasefire agreement in Gaza, attacks across this border will continue.
NPR's Jana Raff reporting. At least 2 people were killed, several others injured after another day of Russian strikes around Ukraine. NPR's Joanna Kakissis reports today's attack follows massive strikes on Ukraine's power grid yesterday.
Air defenses in Ukraine shot down most of the missiles, but one struck a hotel overnight in the central city of Kryvyi Rih, hometown of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky posted a video of rescue workers pulling out survivors from the rubble. He said the West must allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons on military targets in Russia. Zelensky said Ukraine would respond to the attacks and referenced F-16 fighter jets and the ongoing invasion of the Russian region of Kursk. Russia this week launched more than 200 missiles at Ukraine, aiming at the vulnerable energy grid. Joanna Kakissis, NPR News.
The biggest grocery merger in U.S. history is now in the hands of a federal judge. The Federal Trade Commission sued to stop the proposed deal between Kroger and Albertsons, 2 of the country's largest supermarket chains. NPR's Alina Selyuk has more.
Almost 2 years ago, Kroger proposed buying Albertsons for nearly $25 billion, but the deal has faced intense scrutiny from the Federal Trade Commission and many state attorneys general. Now, a trial has started in federal court. The government argues the merger would cut down competition and give suppliers, workers, and shoppers fewer choices, leading to higher prices. Kroger and Albertsons argue together they'd actually have more power to lower prices and compete with other food-selling giants like Walmart, Costco, and Amazon. This is one of 3 lawsuits trying to stop the deal. 2 others are pending by attorneys general in Washington state and Colorado. Alina Selyuk, NPR News.
U.S. futures contracts are trading lower at this hour. Dow futures are down about 0.2%. NASDAQ futures are also lower, down about 0.3%. In world financial markets, Asian markets were higher by the close. You're listening to NPR News.
On WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville.
In a win for Florida and other states suing the federal government, a federal appeals court has blocked the Title IX expansions in the midst of a legal battle over a new rule. Elise Gregg has more.
A new federal rule for Title IX would have expanded regulations for sex-based discrimination to include gender identity in educational programs. However, several states, including Florida, are fighting that rule. Expansions of Title IX to include gender identity could mean protections for things like allowing transgender students to use their bathroom of choice. The states in the lawsuit argue that would violate federal law, though. Though originally denied, an appeals court now has issued an injunction, which means the rule can't go into effect while certain parts of the lawsuit are still pending. I'm Elise Gregg in Miami.
The United States Postal Service is hosting a job fair Saturday to fill about 40 mail carrier spots at stations all over Jacksonville. And applications received this weekend could be eligible to begin training as early as September 21st, the Postal Service says. The office says rural postal carriers and assistant rural carriers make about $20.38 per hour. That job fair is 9 to 3 on Saturday at the Pottsburg Station on Beach Boulevard. Details can be found at usps.com/careers. It's 80 degrees out at the beach right now, a clear sky, and for the afternoon we'll hit almost 90 degrees. Partly sunny with thunderstorms after 1 o'clock today.
PR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, it's a job that requires desire, dedication, and a willingness to defy conventional wisdom. We talk to veterans and a graduate of the self-publishing industry about how they keep turning pages outside of the traditional literary matrix. Later in the program, Mahler's Resurrection kicks off the 75th season of the Jacksonville Symphony. But first, one of my guests had his novel rejected 132 times before seeing his words in print. To discuss the joys and challenges of being a self-published author, I'm joined by Richard Wall, author of Blue Green, Fans Against the Empire. Hi, Richard.
Hi, how are you doing?
Also, Nikesha Williams, author of several books and producer, host of the Black and Published podcast. Hey, Nikesha.
Hey, Ann. Good morning.
Good morning. And Karen Renee, a local romance novelist, author of Unforeseen Riot, as well as 21 other books. Hey, Karen.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So, Richard, you wrote for me in a previous life, in the days of the original Folio Weekly. Writing has always been your passion. Correct. And your topics are a little obscure. As I recall, one of the stories that you wrote for me at Folio was about Denny Fouts, titled The World's Most Expensive Male Prostitute.
Yes, which was a headline you wanted. I wanted a different one. But
did we argue over
that?
It
was a right move.
Okay. Yeah. So, but your current book is about ancient Greece.
Ancient Eastern Roman Empire.
Sports.
When I first decided I wanted to write fiction, I wanted to write about three things: politics, driving, and sports. I've done the other two, which need some work. But this one about sports was about, I learned that there was a riots called the Nika riots in Constantinople in 532 AD CE. And basically, sports fans united to overthrow the emperor. And I'm not going to say whether they did it or not, but it was a time when sports fans, we think we're nuts about sports. No, we're nothing compared to them. They would go out rioting. They'd destroy the city. They'd murder each other. Actually, sometimes after chariot races, it was called the murder hours. And it just things were escalating. And these teams were the blue, the green, the red, and the white. And we think about, gladiators and that kind of stuff. But in the Roman world, chariot racing was much more popular. And these four teams had a history of about 500 years of hatred, even by the time we got to 532 CE. And then it blew up.
And I saw in your notes that Among the Thugs by Bill Buford was one of your inspirations. That's about, English soccer fans, which they always seem a little next level when it comes to being
Yes,
competitive.
well, they could learn a thing or two from the blue-green fans.
Yeah.
And I loved running into Bill Bruford's book because I told the story from the point of view of a rioter because, the riots were the thing that were causing all this problem. And really, the emperors almost gave up against these sports fans in a way, but the riots were a heck of a thing. And I learned from his book with the English rioters how riots go off, who can lead them. And my character actually has a skill of being able to lead a mob towards a property or away from it. And he made money that way. So Bill's book was excellent. I learned a lot.
So something about the research appeals to you, though, Richard. I mean, you spent hundreds of hours working on this particular book.
Correct. And I never knew about it before. I majored in history in college, but it was mostly European English history. But so I just, when I learned about this thing, I went, okay, here's my sports novel. And I'd never dreamed it would be about, 1,500 years ago. But I was just flabbergasted about what's always drawn me to it is the power of sports and society and of team belonging, which we Jaguars fans or whoever you are know, the Gators fans, all over the country, all over the world, people are nuts for sports. And if we take all that energy that people put into sports and time and money, we could cure cancer, poverty, world hunger, and stupidity, But it's always been amazing to me. So that's kind of a subtext of why I wrote this book. And it was an amazing time, I thought.
Nikesha, you have been writing for many, many years, a lot of those years as a self-published author, but you now have the Holy Grail, which is a book deal, right?
Yeah, I do.
How different is it?
It's a lot different. So like when you're self-publishing, it's as the title says, you do everything yourself. You're writing. Hopefully you're not your own editor. I was not. I hired editors. But even that, I'm paying out of pocket for an editor. I'm paying out of pocket for the graphic designer. I'm, doing the copywriting myself, doing the page design, the interior layout myself, making sure it's uploaded to all the distributors and it's going to be live on the right day at the right time. The pre-orders are right. Like you're doing all of that work yourself. And so you have to be very meticulous and anal about it. And so the art of it is the writing. And then when you're self-publishing, once the writing is done, you have to look at it from a business perspective. Now it's still a business perspective, but it's a little different. I actually had an author say to me that, as a traditionally published author, you're both the client and the customer. And so the latest book I wrote, The Seven Daughters of Dupree, was bought and acquired by Scout Press. But now we also want to sell that book to other people. So they bought something from me and now I have to sell it to other people. So client and customer, and making sure that it's right. And so I've done 3 rounds of edits. I thought I was done after the second round. The third round almost took me out. And then when that third round was completed, I think my editor sent me one more note. She's like, please don't kill me. Do this one last thing. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to take me a week. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it now. And it took me 4 hours. And so it's different. And so now the book has been finally being accepted for in production. I have a release date. And I'll be getting copy edits next. And so the process doesn't stop, but it's all toward the goal of getting the book on the shelves. But not only getting the book on the shelves, but having a marketing budget behind it, having a whole team of people, a whole company of people who are like, okay, we invested in you and gave you this advance, and now we want to make our money back. And I'm like, I want you to make your money back so then I can earn royalties and continue to make more money. So it's also a numbers game, and it's also an economic thing. So you really do have to look at it as, when you're writing a book and you're publishing, whether you're self-publishing or have a Big 5 deal like I do now, the fun part is the writing. Everything else after that is business.
We are talking with formerly self-published authors about self-publishing. I want to take a quick call from Jim in Riverside because he has a question. Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, I'd like to ask your ambitious guests, for self-publishing, do you still need an agent, and where can I find a trustworthy editor?
Oh, those are great questions. I want to ask you, Karen. I mean, you've published, as we said, 22 books, primarily romance books. Um, do you have an agent? Have you ever felt the need for an agent?
I do not currently have an agent. And the only, I don't know, right now I would only consider an agent for potentially translations or further audio book deals, because distributing that and producing those types of works is much more cost intensive and labor intensive. And as for Jim's question about finding an editor, that took me almost as long as it did to write the actual book,
Wow.
because that's a relationship that I wanted to build, and this person has such a direct impact on the manuscript, and so it was a matter of just networking with other authors and finding someone who was the right fit for my subgenre and my voice.
And so, tell us how you got started writing. You've been and you loved writing since you were a young person. But when did you
Yes.
begin doing it?
I wrote my first book in my 20s, but then I didn't go anywhere with it because I feel like, sometimes your first book is where you make all of the mistakes. And so that book's just going to live under the bed, so to speak. And then after I had a child, and it was getting close to time for me to either, re-enter the workforce or figure out something. And my husband said, "Why don't you write a book?" And so I did and tried my hand at self-publishing, and it just grew from there.
And did you start self-publishing after trying to a more traditional route, or did you just go straight to it?
I had tried submitting a short story to Ellery McQueen magazine because it's a mystery-based magazine, and was rejected. And then I just, when I learned about the self-publishing industry and the boom, I decided to give it a shot because I really do like having all of that control for myself.
Richard, I know that you've dealt with the question of an agent or not an agent, or who you can rely on as an editor, and there are some pitfalls out there that can exploit young writers or new writers.
Yes, with the explosion of self-publication, there's also an explosion of an industry to help people be self-published. Um, Conferences, joining organizations, newsletters, things like that. You can hire, to the caller's question. You can hire an editor, as Karen has done, and Nikesha has found one and used before. You can find them through. Every area has a local writers group, and here in Jacksonville, I'm not affiliated with it, but River City Writers, it's Writers Helping Writers, and the caller might want to check there first, and they could put you in the right direction for editors. I I might have made a mistake. I edited my book myself because I am the editor in chief of a medical marketing company in Denver, Vanguard Communications. So I'm working with words and things all the time. Um, I think I did a pretty good job, but I'm not sure. But that saved me a lot of money. And Karen has developed a relationship with an editor, so I took the shortcut like that. And you really only need an agent if you're trying to get published traditionally, because that's the avenue into a publishing house. It used to be you could send your manuscript to a publishing house. That's really not the way to go anymore. You need an agent. So, and there are a lot of them out
Really?
there.
So, and was that the key for you, Nikesha, getting an agent in terms of getting to be published, or how did that work for you?
So the Seven Daughters of Dupree is my first like big five book. So it's coming out from Scout Press, which is an imprint of Gallery Books at Simon and Schuster. When Simon and Schuster, of course, is one of the top five major publishers in the country, yes, but also in the world. For that book, I did have an agent. For the book that came out before that, which was also traditionally published, it was a smaller book. It was called Mardi Gras Indians, my first nonfiction work, and that was published by LSU Press. I did not have an agent at that time. And the way that book came about was because I was freelancing and I had written an essay, and I've told the story before on this program. I had written an essay for the Bitter Southerner called Beans and Rice More Than a Poor Man's Meal. And then the acquisitions editor from LSU Press reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I read your essay. We're doing a series of books. Would you like to write for us?" And so that was something that I negotiated and did on my own.
Mm.
With the Seven Daughters of Dupree, I was very intentional about, you know what? I need to stop self-publishing. There was an event that happened that we don't have to go into. I was like, you know what? There's a better way to do this. And so I written the book. I revised it, and then I started submitting for an agent. And I had done that with my very first book, For Women, in 2015. Yeah, when I first finished 2015. And I had gotten an agent then, but things didn't work out, and I ended up self-publishing for a number of years. But with Seven Daughters, I knew I had something, and I knew I had something by when I went on, started querying for an agent. I had like a list of 17. I think I queried the first 12. And after sending that first batch of queries in 2022, I got 6 immediate requests for a full manuscript, which is like really good feedback. Like, okay, this is going to work. And it did. And so I signed with my agent, Peter Steinberg of UTA, which is a very large talent and literary agency based in New York, in March of last year. And then we went on submission with the book in May, and the book sold in a week.
Wow. We're talking about the rewards and challenges of self-publishing. If you have self-published, if you have questions about it, we would love to hear from you. Give us a call at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Karen, one thing that I thought was really interesting about your books, I mean, they're romance books. They often surround kind of a biker theme or sort of an outlaw character theme. But they also come with a playlist, which I thought was fascinating. So at the beginning of every book, you kind of have this playlist that goes along with the story, and it's very eclectic. I mean, you've songs from Danzig, from The Clash, from Florida. It's a very broad spectrum. How did you think to do that? Where did that come from?
So to me, the best day is when I buy a new book and I get new music and the two mesh, like the songs just go with the story. And I happened to be reading another self-published author, and her book started with a playlist, and I thought, well, why can't I do that? So anytime, something from a song will inspire a character or inspires a scene, then that tends to make the playlist. My playlists are much longer than what actually gets published because things just have to go. But I love music, and I just feel like that's one way to give the reader something extra.
Are you listening to those songs when you're writing those books?
In some cases, yes. And then after that, I can't listen to that song anymore without thinking of those characters. So it's like a double-edged sword.
And how do you get your story ideas? Where do you get your inspiration? And what's the way that you approach writing a book? Like, what's your process?
Normally I have an inciting incident. I just will, inspiration will strike with how these two characters will meet. And then, whatever problem is facing the heroine, I'll have to do research on how, you would actually solve that. But, with the vigilanteism of the heroes, they tend to want to try to solve things themselves.
And so what kind of audience do you have? What feedback do you hear from your readers? How do you connect with them? How do they get your stuff?
Most of my readers will connect with me on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and I target readers of other similar authors in my subgenre because it's a pretty wide area of romance.
I was interested to learn. We recently had on someone who focused almost exclusively on hockey romances, and I was like, I was dumbfounded. I didn't realize that was actually like a subgenre that was a thing, but it is.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of space in that field for niche writing.
Yes. Yeah. And readers will have different tastes, as the seasons progress. So
Interesting. Nikesha, I want to ask you about your approach to choosing topics, because a lot of times your books have been rooted in or keying off of events in real life, like the murder of Trayvon Martin or Hurricane Katrina, but then you kind of bring in, a personal story or perhaps just a human story that reflects some of that. So how do you integrate, actual things in real life with the fiction?
So I think the reason that there's always like a news peg to it is because I'm a newsie. Like I was a news producer, I'm a journalist by trade. So that was always in my mind, and those kinds of stories and doing that work, it was always present in there. But I'm endlessly curious about people and endlessly curious about their relationships to one another. So with Four Women and the sequel, The Appeal of Ebony Jones, yes, it started because the news at the time was the murders and the killings of Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis. But then the question to myself was, this is happening to Black boys and Black men. Where are the Black women in the stories? Like, it's not just the grieving mothers. Like, where are they? And we know it's happening. So, like, you see Sonia Massey or the Sandra Blands, or the Renisha McBrides, and Rakia Boyds, and Breonna Taylor. So many, and like we can call those names now. But in 2013, when I started For Women, there were no names to call. Like that, there was this hashtag that began "Say Her Name," and then the "Say Her Name" project exploded out of that. And so now you may know some names, but it's still even not as on par with the boys and the men. So like that's where those stories came from. Beyond Bourbon Street obviously came from Katrina, and that novel was an outgrowth of my senior thesis in undergrad, which that was 2008. So right after Katrina happened, my grandparents, both of my parents are from New Orleans. My mother's parents lived in the lower Ninth Ward off Claiborne Avenue on Charbonnet. And so my grandmother's house had 23 feet of water. She never went back home after 2005. Like they went to clean out the house, but then she ended up moving to Mississippi with an aunt. And so writing the original story novella in undergrad, by the time I became an adult and got married and had children, I wondered, what would it be like to make a life in the lower Ninth Ward 15 years post-Katrina, where if you go to New Orleans, you go to the lower Ninth Ward almost 20 years post-Katrina now, and you go see what it looks like the storm was a year or two ago. It's still empty plots of land and nothing like it was when I was a child and would go visit. So like that was the inspiration there. And so there are always many different catalysts, but I'm always concerned about the people. And the same thing for The Seven Daughters of Dupree. That novel is like an epic, so it spans from time from 1999 to 1860. It's about the secrets kept between mothers and daughters over the course of 7 generations. There were several different inciting incidents and stories that I wanted to tell about colorism, about passing, about the impacts and legacy and the vestiges of slavery and how that carries in Black women's lives from, again, 1860 all the way to 1999. But it is also a story about family and about mothers and daughters trying to do better as they go on and as they were raised, and what may keep them from that, or what turning points in their lives have kept them from being one way or turned them into something else.
We have a question from Tom on Facebook. I'm going to direct to you, Richard. He says, how do these writers identify and reach their market? First of all, how do you define your market when you're self-published? You don't have somebody that's sort of telling you, oh, this is who this is going to reach, or this is the best audience to pursue.
Right. Marketing is a big challenge for me, but I guess a major way is through social media, which everyone has access to, through Amazon also, which most self-published writers are on, and that's one way to do it. There are many varieties of that, the way you can advertise your work or not. You can also try to do things like get on your local radio show and talk about it. You can pitch to newspapers. You can ask to be a guest blogger on a website that covers writing and certain kind of things. It also highly depends on your genre. My genre in this book is historical fiction. And so that's the way you need to kind of go, or those are the readers you want to get. And as Karen was saying, try to get readers who are reading similar books to yours. So I'm currently right now on a big learning curve trying to learn Amazon's advertising algorithms.
Oh.
And it's pretty much like Nikesha was saying, you're on your own. You're marketing it on your own. You're the writer, you're the producer, you are the talent, and yeah, you got to market the thing too. It's an uphill battle for me and for a lot of writers.
I mean, you've also had to deal with a lot of rejection, as we alluded to. How do you keep your spirits strong, when you're getting rejection after rejection from literary agents?
Yeah, well, first, they're all idiots, of course. But no, I'm just kidding. It's very hard to break into traditional publishing. An agent may have a certain thing he or she is looking for, and maybe their house is pushing another title that's similar to yours. Maybe Eastern Roman Empire and chariot racing has been done before. I was kind of sunk when the new movie of Ben-Hur came out, and then I went, "Oh, this is terrible." So that's all right for me. But
you can still sell the film rights.
I can still sell the film rights. That's right. And yeah, it's pretty difficult.
I will say, I mean, I did start on your novel just last night, but it is a very enjoyable read. I mean, I'm liking it a great deal.
Well, good,
So,
good.
we have a question I want to direct to you, Karen, from Jermaine. She says she wants the authors to give a step-by-step on how to self-publish. What's the just kind of nickel version of how you do that?
Well, first you have to finish the book, and that can be very daunting. And once you've had it edited and you have a polished product that you're willing to put out there, I would open an account on Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing, and then you would need to figure out what kind of cover. I paid for a cover. I pay for all of my covers because designing your own cover is not necessarily the right way to go. You may think you are your own reader, but you don't necessarily have your finger on the pulse of the market, and that cover is the first thing that most people see.
Interesting.
But I would get a cover, have the manuscript ready, upload to Amazon, and then decide if you're going to be exclusive with Amazon or you're going to try to go with other retailers. And then there are distributors such as Drafted Digital that you can use to help streamline that process so that it's not completely time consuming.
And I'm going to ask you, Jermaine, now you're on the air. Is that answer your question? Is that sufficient, or do you have additional questions about how to get there?
Well, that's a great beginning. I was writing down what everyone said. And my book is fictional. Is it the best way to go is through Amazon, or are there other avenues to take?
Good question.
There are other avenues you can take. I believe there's a distributor called Publish Drive that can get you into Amazon and other retail platforms if you just want to do one thing one time. But I believe they charge a fee on top of taking a percentage of your royalties. But most of the successful self-published authors that I know start with Amazon and then grow from there.
Richard.
There's another outfit you can go with called Ingram Spark. They are free also, and they can publish in libraries, in bookstores. Sell to those places, and on other online platforms like Apple Books, Nook, things like that.
Okay, I've got a call from our friend Stanley. Good morning, Stanley. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Good morning to everybody. Great subject. But my message is out to Miss Williams. I am so proud of you, and I want to thank you for what you are doing for the African American community. And don't forget, I love you.
Thank you, Stanley. I love you too.
Very sweet. Preparing for this, I was looking at some stats, Nikesha, about self-publishing, and some of the statistics are a little grim. It says that the average self-published book sells 250 copies, but when you really get into it, the average book by a professional publisher sells just about 3,000 copies over the lifetime of the book. So it's a tough business.
Very. Again, you do it because you love it and you do it for the art. You talk about marketing. I am not the algorithm girl, but what I did know how to do was order my own books and go pop up somewhere, which we've talked about. Or because I was working in television, being on programs like First Coast Connect or local stations in Jacksonville, or I would drive to Savannah or Orlando.
Let me ask
or
you
Tampa.
this. You're saying that you would go onto Amazon, buy your own book, and then go sell it?
So when you distribute, I used Amazon in the beginning, but then I switched completely over to Ingram Spark because they will distribute to Amazon, to Apple, to Barnes & Noble. So anybody can buy my book that's a retailer or a library anywhere in the world. And I can have nothing to do with it, which is what I really love, because as people started to know who I would see sales that I had nothing to do with from the distributor. But what I would do to market was that I would buy author copies of my book. So I would just have boxes in my trunk or in my home.
Author copies.
And then I would go to different events, book festivals. So like the Printers Row Lit Fest in Chicago, the Baltimore Book Festival in Maryland.
This is when you're running around with the
running around with the square reader in my purse. Absolutely. But I would go to these different book festivals. I would go to the Jacksonville Book Festival, which is coming up next month, and then sell my book in person. So now people are being able to meet me as an author, see the books that I have, talk to me about it, establish a personal relationship. And then what I did was to be able to continue to sell to them is I would have a sign-up sheet for my newsletter, which is on my website, newrights.com. And I would then send a newsletter every month to the subscribers. I actually just sent a newsletter today letting them know, like, I have a release date for the 7 Daughters of Dupree.
Which is?
January 27th, 2026. So 16 months from today, the book will be out, and hopefully I'll be back to talk about it. And so I would do all of that. Or, like, as I said, I use my different news connections. So driving to Savannah, driving to Tampa, driving to Orlando to do interviews about the book because, again, it always had a news tie. And so I was able to pitch it that way. So that I would have the 5-minute clip to post on social media so that people who may have been connected to me but were not near me would see what I was doing, know my work, and then be able to get to it. So it's very difficult to do that at a self-published level. But now it's something that I'm going to have to do at the traditionally published level. And so I need to sell a whole lot more than 3,000 copies. I won't say what the number is, but I need to sell a whole lot more than 3,000 copies to begin to recoup on this here advance. So if everybody under the sound of my voice can, on January 27th of 2026, buy a copy of The Seven Daughters of Dupree, I'd appreciate it. But beyond just buying a copy, you also have to promote that book. And so the life of the book is how long you allow it to be. And so now there are authors who will hire independent publicists separate and apart from their publishing company to help them find events and go and do interviews and book festivals and panels. Like, I did 2 TED Talks in 2018 in support of my work. I was just doing the things that I thought would help me, and nobody really knows what they're doing. Everybody's throwing spaghetti at a wall and trying to figure it out, whether you're self-published or whether you're traditionally published. And so you're relying on your network and the people that you know and the skill set that you have to really do it.
But your approach to doing all of this on your own also involved some really brutal hours. I mean, you were working, you were getting up, you had babies to take care of.
Yeah. So when I first started writing for women, I was between jobs. But when I eventually finished it in 2015, like March of 2015, I had been working at Action News Jax. I worked the morning show. So I worked 1 a.m. to about 9 a.m. I would come home from work at 9 a.m. While I was writing while I was pregnant. So when I was pregnant, I would just write from like 9 a.m. to like noon, and then I'd take a nap, wake up, make dinner, do wifely things of that nature. I kept that same schedule after my son was born. So, like, babies don't sleep anyway, and I was like, I'm used to being up from 1 to 9 a.m. And so I just kept that same schedule until I finished the first draft of that book. And I would write like that for years. And then when I switched from morning shift to a night side shift, so now I'm working 2:30 to midnight, I think my son was about 3. It sucked, but I would only see him for maybe an hour in the morning time. But like, I'd wake him up, get him ready for school, get his breakfast, take him to school. And then I come home, and from 9 a.m. to like 1:30, sometimes 2, because I was often late to work, I would write all morning and then go to work and work 2:30 to midnight. So when I talk about, like, I would drive to Tampa and Orlando, there were days where I would wake up at 5 a.m., drive 3 hours to Tampa, do a Tampa morning show for 5 minutes, drive back to Jacksonville, and then go straight to work and work till midnight. And did that for years, or driving down to the Miami Book Festival or the Tampa Book Festival, or different things just to get my work out there and meet people and meet readers and let people meet me and get to know me, and not just me through my work, but like me as a person as well.
Richard, there's a Substack that's kind of on writing by a guy named Frederick DeBoer, and he has an agent and a publishing house at this point. But he says that self-publishing leaves writers, quote, in a perpetual state of not knowing if they're a happy amateur or a disgruntled professional.
Very good point.
Where do you feel like you fall on that spectrum?
I am a happy, disgruntled professional, self-published writer who would like to be published by a house, a publisher. One thing I want to point out, which was really interesting, Nikesha's book is coming out in 16 months. I could put a self-published book out in 2 weeks.
If it's written.
If it's written. Yeah, I can't write it that fast. Last year, I think there were 500,000 self-published books in the U.S. There were 10,000 traditionally published books. It's really flopping around, but it's a good point. When I wrote my book, every book I've written, I've sent it to trusted friends to read. What do you think? Got good feedback. But before I self-published it, I sent it to Kirkus Reviews. You pay them, and they will give you a review. And if it's a terrible review, that's it. I got a good review, and I went, all right, I'm self-publishing. I'm going.
Interesting.
So I know, and I knew before then that it was a good book. I recrafted it. I cut out 35,000 words and changed the pacing after it had been finished for 2 years. I like it even better now. And I'm still getting some feedback that it's a good book. And you saying it was, that's nice, even if you're just in the first chapter, you need to hook them in the first chapter.
Yep.
But yeah, I believe that I'm successful. I don't care if I sell any books. I've done a good job in the story. I wish I could be as prolific as Karen and as published
Karen,
traditionally.
what is your metric for success?
My metric for success, I think, is just if the next book does better than the prior book. I do long pre-orders, and as long as those numbers keep going up, that's one of my main metrics. And also, as long as I keep making the readers happy, because they're pretty vocal. Romance readers tend to be.
Is that right? You
Yes.
get a lot of feedback
Yeah.
from them? Well, I want to thank you all for sharing your stories, all very different stories, but you're all very accomplished writers, and it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Up next, we're going to be talking about the 75th anniversary of the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra, which kicks off with an Eckend symphony known as the Resurrection.
Yes.
What should people know about it?
Well, it's one of the most enormous pieces in the repertoire, and it's the kind of piece that you reach for when you want to celebrate something really important, just the way we tend to play Beethoven 9 at New Year's Eve. Mahler 2 is one of those pieces that really defines the grandeur of the human spirit being great enough to even overcome death. And there's something about special occasions like the opening of the 75th season, which we're about to embark on, that need that kind of emotional catharsis to feel big enough. And this is definitely one of those pieces that provides that.
So is that what the industry calls it, Mahler 2?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got to know the lingo.
Yep.
So this actually got new attention with the release of the film Maestro, which is about Leonard Bernstein. He was a famous conductor, of this piece. And his interpretation of it was controversial.
Yeah.
Explain why.
It's very slow. Bernstein tended to do everything to the absolute extreme, which is wonderful, a certain way, but it can sometimes make performances a little portentous. And he was a great Mahler conductor. We owe him a lot because remember, before the 1970s, nobody really played this music. It sat in relative obscurity between Mahler's death and the 1970s when it was rediscovered. And Bernstein was a huge proponent of that. There are wonderful video rehearsals of him conducting the Mahler symphonies with the Vienna Phil the first time they ever play it, and he's teaching them their own music. So we owe Bernstein a lot, but I have to say I wouldn't reach for that CD if I were going to listen to the piece.
Who would you listen to other than yourself?
No, absolutely not. It's far too embarrassing. Claudio Abbado or Simon Rattle would be my two conductors, both with the Berlin Philharmonic.
Okay. And so this performance, this piece has 5 parts, 5.
Yep.
Explain to me what they're movements, right?
5 movements.
So, but there's actually a giant break that occurs between a couple of them. It's supposed to be 5 minutes long.
Well, Mahler actually writes that it be 10 minutes in the score between the first and second movement. In practice, that's really a very, very long time to sit quietly in a concert hall.
Well, explain what that's about. I mean, this is not John Cage. It's a an actual orchestra performance.
Well, the first movement is incredibly dark. The pieces are kind of journey from darkness to light, from sadness to happiness. So the first movement, which was originally entitled Totenfeier or Funeral Rites, when Mahler wrote it as a standalone piece, is very dark in the kind of way that we might hear in the first movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It's very philosophical. Then the second movement is a Ländler, a very easy Austrian dance. And Mahler just felt that the contrast was so great between the two movements that the audience needed a second to kind of take a deep breath.
Interesting. And so how long of a pause do you take in your performance?
I think about 5 minutes. Yeah.
Really? Okay. I wanted to listen to a piece of the third movement because there's this sometimes known as the death shriek. It's kind of a very intense moment. And I just wanted to play it and then have you describe what it's like conducting that moment. So talk about that.
Getting goosebumps listening to it. I mean, this is about as good as conducting gets, conducting this music. You feel like you're Superman. And having all those instruments at the end of your fingertips. It's incredibly exciting. It's one of the reasons I continue to love the job so much. But Mahler too is one of those pieces that I think most conductors would say is on their, top 2 or 3 things to conduct, because it's just so exciting being in front of that much sound.
It's so complicated, though, and you're also working with a full chorus, right? So how do you manage all of those moving pieces? It's got to be very difficult, I would think, emotionally, physically, to keep all that together.
See, the thing nobody ever realizes when they say, what does a conductor do, is that all the music says is fast, slow, moderate tempo. It could be any number of different speeds. And you use your tempo in a way that you can try and make the whole performance from beginning to end, 90 minutes, a single arc. And that's good conducting, when you feel that one movement flows seamlessly from the one before. And that's actually very difficult to do, because when you're actually in the moment, you're dealing with a million different events. You're bringing in clarinets and telling people to play softer and bringing in the soloist. But so part of your head is absolutely local, but then part of your head is almost like a bird flying over the top of the piece in the sky, looking at the whole thing and where you are. You don't get too fast here, because you've got to go all that way to the end of that bit, and then you'll be too fast there. You can overcook things or undercook things when you conduct. So I'm very happy to be doing this piece for the second time. We did it a few years here before. Carrie Ann said the first 80 performances of any piece were bad. So
really?
Here's for number 2.
So some of the people that you chose to be vocalists in this are really well known. A soprano, Ailyn Pérez, and a mezzo-soprano named Isabel Leonard. So how did you choose them, and what's their interplay with this performance?
Well, Isabel Leonard is a very famous mezzo. She actually sang it in Maestro. She's the singer who sings the same music on that film. So we were delighted to get her. Ailyn and I have a bit more of a personal relationship, because her husband, the great bass baritone Solomon Howard, sang in our performance of La Bohème a couple of years ago. And they're this very famous, beautiful couple. And she came to his Bohème performances and then came to the cast party at my house afterwards. And we met and we played some Schubert together at the piano. So we got to know each other, and then I bumped into her again last year at the Paris Opera when we were both working there. So when you have random connections with people, you can get soloists who are sometimes out of your price range. You can persuade them to come, which is what we've done here.
Yeah, and so this is kicking off on the 21st of September, is that right? This is a one night only.
One night only, yeah.
And so what should people think about? How should they prepare for an event like this? I mean, if they're going in cold and they're maybe not a symphonic expert, but they know that this piece is appealing for all of the reasons that we've talked about.
Listen to it before you go.
Really?
And I always think that you get so much more out of classical music when you know the music. Very hard to listen to a piece the first time and get more than 30% of what's going on. And also, once you've listened to
music, that's interesting. Yeah.
Once you know a piece, you know your way through it, and you're much likely to get bored in the middle or lost. So I would recommend getting a CD, going on Spotify or Tidal, and streaming a couple of performances.
There are still some VIP packages available for this event,
right.
And of course tickets available at the Jacksonville Symphony website.
Yep, jacksymphony.org.
All right, well, it's a pleasure to have you back, Courtney Lewis. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Anne. It's lovely to see you.
Up next, if you've got traffic complaints, don't go anywhere. We'll tell you how you can weigh in on solutions.
News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, our series Classic Films and Movie Icons continues with 2 stars who started as child actors. Jodie Foster became famous for her roles in Freaky Friday and Taxi Driver, Molly Ringwald for starring in 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, and Pretty in Pink. Join us
today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
I'm Scott Tong. Louisiana Public School librarian Amanda Jones spoke out against censorship in public. Then came the haters, online and in person.
I liken it to that scene from Beauty and the Beast, where they're like, we've got to kill the beast. And these people just started dogpiling on me with these comments.
Jones talks about her new memoir, next time in Here and Now.
Today starting at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
Joe Biden's stance on the war in Gaza cost him hundreds of thousands of votes in the presidential primaries. With the new nominee, the uncommitted say they're unconvinced.
You're bombing our families with our money, and just one good speech is going to win us over again? I don't think so.
As the campaign moves into top gear, can Kamala Harris win back this key constituency? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. In an area crosshatched by busy highways and limited public transit, transportation can be a touchy subject. One person who hears about it plenty is Wiley Page, transportation consultant for the North Florida Transportation Planning Organization. Hey, Wiley.
Good morning.
Good morning. So you must hear travel complaints from people all the time. What road do you hear the most about?
Probably I-95 and some of the congestion that occurs there every morning and every afternoon.
Mm-hmm. And what's the chief complaint or solution as you see it?
Well, I think the solution has to take many forms. Choices are the big thing, and that's what we're seeing in the work that we're doing right now with the 2050 long-range plan. So not only making improvements to I-95, so maybe adding lanes, but also looking at what can we do on parallel roadways like US 1. How can we maybe utilize the railroad that is in between US 1 and I-95 and look for commuter rail solutions? Or is there a transit solution with a bus rapid transit lane, perhaps, that runs up to 95 that connects to
I feel
areas?
like the train solution is something that I've been hearing about for about 30 years. Wouldn't that be a great idea? It seems so simple. What's the challenge there? Why isn't that done already?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that, but it is something that has continually gained steam, if you will, over the last 10, 15 years. And we're doing a survey right now, the third survey in the long-range plan, and that is a project that continues to come up, and it has a lot of support from the people that have been responding, which is well over 3,000 people at this point, that they would really like to see commuter rail connecting Jacksonville to St. Augustine. That's probably the biggest, the route that has the most support, but then also up towards the airport. And how can we go to the north? JTA has looked at those or is looking at those. I don't know the current status of that, but you have to look at how can we share the rail with and First Coast Railway and CSX and make sure that everybody can get along and moving along the track. So that's the biggest thing, the biggest hurdle that has to be overcome.
So the TPO, the Transportation Planning Organization, is over 4 counties in this region: Duval, Clay, Nassau, St. John's. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of territory. Are there regional priorities within that region that get the most love, the most money, the most focus?
Yes. So each year the TPO with its partners looks at all 4 of those counties and comes up with a list of priority projects, which is about 20 projects long now. And it ranges from roadway projects, transit projects, bicycle pedestrian projects, trail projects, et cetera. So again, going back to the choices, we really are trying to not focus solely on the automobile.
Are you just chasing development often, though? Are you able to be proactive, or are you just reactive when somebody dumps a giant new, planned community?
We get that a lot, that we're not planning ahead. But the biggest challenge that we do know about a lot of this ahead of time. Local governments know about it ahead of time. But to implement these projects, especially major capacity type projects or major rail type projects, takes 10 to 15 years. Number one, we don't have enough money to implement these projects all at once. And then the studies that have to be done, the environmental considerations, purchase of right-of-way, design, and so forth, that takes time. And that's a chief complaint that we hear is why does it take so long to move from an idea to construction? And that's the way it is, unfortunately, is that it takes, even if we had all the money sitting in the bank ready to do a project, best case scenario, 8 to 10 years to get that done. And we never have all of the money sitting in the bank.
I've known that the county commissioners often serve an advisory role to the TPO in terms of representing for their constituents, but who are the other partner agencies that TPO has to work with or work alongside?
So they work with all of the transportation agencies in the region. That would include FDOT, sort of Florida Department of Transportation, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, the ports, so Fernandina and Jacksport, as well as the airport authority down in St. Augustine. I'm trying to think who else. So anybody that has anything to do with transportation is typically represented.
And the airport in Jacksonville, too, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. So, and there's other advisory committees to the TPO board. So there's a Citizens Advisory Committee that is made up of citizens from around the region, and then the Technical Advisory Committee, which is where a lot of the planning and all the planning and engineers from the local governments and those authorities and agencies all come together pretty much monthly to discuss these items.
And so this study that's being done, this is a continuing study. What stage is it, and how can people participate if they want to weigh in?
So it's the 2050 long range plan. It is done every 5 years, updated every 5 years. We go out another 5 years. So this is an update to the 2045 plan. It's a federally mandated requirement that all the MPOs, TPOs around the country have to do. And we have a website where a lot of information is there, but probably most importantly, our third and final survey is there, and it is at 2050pathforward.com.
All right. Well, Wiley Page, thank you so much for being here. I do want to mention that North Florida TPO is a sponsor of this program, but we really appreciate you coming on and explaining kind of the history and the goals of that project.
Thank you very much. And
that's our program. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. If you missed anything, catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock on WJCT or anytime on your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow when longtime Florida Times Union photographer Bob Self joins us for a snapshot of his career on the eve of his retirement. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.